Hey guys, welcome back to the Yes Means Yes podcast. On this week's episode, we have Annabelle Farrow on to talk about human trafficking. As usual, my name is Faith Namship. I'm victim advocate outreach coordinator with Rape Counselors, and I will let Amanda introduce herself, and then Annabelle will talk about what she has done with us in the past, Rape Counselors, and also what experience she has with human trafficking, specifically when she spent a summer in Thailand. So, Amanda?
Hey guys, I'm Amanda Carpenter and I'm also with RCEA and I am the Victim Advocate Outreach Specialist. So now I'll let Annabelle kind of talk about herself and we just thank you for coming on today.
Of course. Hi, I'm Annabelle. I volunteered with RCEA, then I interned. Now I'm the co-prevention educator. I am super involved in like the fight for human trafficking. That's like where my heart's at. Last summer, I got to go to Thailand because another organization that I work for is Free for Life International, and they have like connections there to safe houses. So I stayed with a couple who live in Thailand full time. They've been there for like 10 years. They work with the house that Free for Life helps to pay for. I spent my time figuring out how to make jewelry out of like simple things so that the girls could learn a trade so that they would be able to support themselves when they decided to leave the home. I also went to the bars or like the red light districts where the girls are sold every single night. That in itself is not considered trafficking, but a lot of girls are trafficked out of the bars. So went there, talked to the girls, got to see what it was like. I would give them like money. I would buy like a Diet Coke so that they would have like less that they had to make for that night. I went to the home and got to meet the girls and heard their stories and basically just like hung out with them. And then I also took a human trafficking training course while I was there just so I could make sure I was learning as much as I could.
Can you like tell us a little bit what exactly is human trafficking? Can you kind of just explain what that means?
So there's a lot of definitions, and I looked at a lot of them online, but the one I liked the best was from Free for Life, like what they've composed together. And it's when someone is forced or misled into work that produces fear and provides personal gain or profit to others. So human trafficking is sex trafficking, forced labor, debt bondage, or forced domestic servitude, which is basically just like a fancy word for like your in-home slave. But my heart is more with like the sex trafficking victim providers and stuff like that.
Okay, so you kind of went over different types of human trafficking, like what individuals would be sold for in human trafficking. Do all of those forms exist within the United States?
Mm-hmm. Basically, the biggest one in the United States is like sex trafficking, a lot with children, but there is forced labor, but it's just not as much here, at least that I know of. The forced labor is more in like other parts of the world, but definitely the sex trafficking here.
There's a lot of sex trafficking in the United States. Obviously, as rape counselors, we work a lot with sexual assault victims, and in the past, we have had a couple of individuals who we found out were part of human trafficking. What would you say the intersection between sexual assault and human trafficking is?
So I think that human trafficking is like the umbrella term. So like I'm saying, there's also labor trafficking and sex trafficking, debt bondage, all of that stuff. So that's like the big term. I think sex trafficking is when a victim is sold repeatedly for sex, which is sexual assault. The trafficked victim will often be raped by their trafficker a lot before they're actually sold. That's so that the trafficker can like gain the control and strike fear in them, which we also see happens in sexual assault cases. It's all about the control of the trafficker. And so they will abuse the victim enough so they think that they have them under their control, and then they will start to sell them out.
Do you typically see like a lot of physical violence along with sexual violence for those who are trafficked?
Yeah, I think that physical or sexual violence is like a form of physical violence. But a lot of physical violence people think is just like a black eye or like getting beat up or something. That definitely happens. The stories and the girls that I've seen are beaten up, like physically. Back to the control thing, the traffickers are using force and fear and anything that they can to break you down, break the victim down, to have more control of them. One of the questions that drives me the most crazy is like, well, why don't people just leave? Well, when you're psychologically broken down, you think there's no hope, there's no way for you to get out there, you can't just leave. Like, it's not like you can just walk out and leave. Everything that has like happened to you, it's so traumatic, you're not like in the right mind space to just get up and leave. So I hate when people say that. I think sex trafficking is physical and sexual violence, because none of the sex is wanted or consented for, which would be in the sexual violence, sexual assault definition.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's interesting you bring that, why don't you just leave, into it, because I feel like that's also something that we deal with a lot in the sexual assault world. It's like sometimes individuals will still stay in contact with their perpetrators or even have sex with them again after being raped. And like you said, it's that psychological thing where, like, for many different reasons, maybe they're afraid, maybe they just want to pretend it didn't happen, things like that. So I think that's really interesting that you kind of can see that in both ones. And also there's that stigma tied to both instances.
The traffickers, or like if someone is sexually assaulted, they will threaten like their family or their friends. So they'll be thinking, if I stay in this situation, I'd rather it happen to me. Or like a lot of the girls in Thailand, the reason that they're working in bars or they are trafficked is because they do have to provide for their families. So no matter how miserable they are and they hate selling their body and they hate the way that they're treated, and they're in these situations where they're like kept wherever their trafficker keeps them, they don't want to be there and they are afraid to leave, but also sometimes they can't, because if they leave, they'll probably be killed. Their family will be killed. If they have a baby, like while they're in the trafficking, like they don't want to leave their child. It can be hard to get your child out of that situation. It's just a lot more complex than people think if you can't just leave.
Definitely, yeah. So to give everyone kind of an estimate, just an idea of the prevalence, and how many human trafficking victims are in the United States?
So I also wanted to make sure I got my numbers right. So I looked a lot of places. So right now there's like 40.3 million in the whole world. And that's just what we know. Obviously, there's tons of stuff going on that we don't know about. And the government hasn't figured out yet, because traffickers are incredibly smart. They are able to lay low and do all the things that they do. But in America, there's like hundreds of thousands. In 2019, 22,300 were identified, but that's only what was found. That's only like what was caught or on the radar. 4,384 traffickers were identified in the US last year. Once again, identified, actually convicted, stuff like that. Like, there's tons we don't know about. And there was 1,912 suspicious businesses. So in America, a lot of small businesses, because it's a small business, they're able to like do like shadier stuff behind the scenes. So that was the businesses that they didn't have like proof that something was happening, but they're pretty sure. And I got all those numbers from the Polaris Project, which I think they do a really good job of like keeping up to date with stuff. And the market of human trafficking is $150 billion like per year industry. So there's definitely more than those numbers that are out there.
Right.
So I know, just like a lot of people just don't believe it's happening. They just don't believe it would happen in their town or in their little small town. So, you know, we're in Auburn, Alabama. And so a lot of people think, oh, that would never happen there. It's such a safe town. And it is, but it happens a lot more. Just like, I think it was 2 weeks ago, they've been watching a few, I guess, hotels in Opelika, and they actually busted 3 people for human trafficking. And I'm sure that it was not something that they just watched for a week or two. I'm sure it's something that is a long term. You have to watch it closely, because you don't want to scare them off, because you want to save as many people as possible from it. I know that We were a few weeks ago, me and an intern with RCEA, we were going to different hotels and we were just giving out our information. And when we would walk in, there was actually signs at the check-in that was talking about human trafficking. And there were posters up about prostitution. So when you walk into a hotel and you see signs that are laminated when you're like checking in about human trafficking, that has to scream, it is a huge issue. People are not just going to put that up in their hotels because that's going to scare people away. So I think the more people are like knowledgeable about human trafficking and know that it's actually happening and realizing that it's happening in their communities, no matter how safe they think their community is, human traffickers, they're like you said earlier, they're smart and they think things through and they're not easily caught. So yeah, just want to put that in.
Yeah, I-65 and I-20, which goes through Alabama and goes through Tennessee, are the sex trafficking highways. So all of the little towns through there where, like you're saying, you think it's safe or whatever, like it's super easy to get girls and guys from point A to point B really quickly through those highways.
So Annabelle, who typically are victims of human trafficking and who is at risk of being a victim of human trafficking? And I guess in this case is specifically sex trafficking.
Yeah, so in America right now it's runaways, foster care, and homeless youth. You can be trafficked at an older age, but generally they go for younger because younger usually makes more money and they're easier to manipulate. And all of those people are in really vulnerable situations where they don't have like a person necessarily always looking out for them. In other countries, women and children at any situation are very vulnerable. Like I was saying, the girls in Thailand, a lot of them get into these situations because they think that they're going to work as a waitress or a nanny or something and they can send the money back to their families, and then they end up being sent to another country to work as a sex slave. Like it's just like I was saying, they're smart. They can see what that person needs or where they're vulnerable, and they'll meet them where they are to make it look like it's a good situation. We'll help you out. There's a lot of female traffickers also. So, I mean, I typically feel more comfortable talking to like an adult woman than an adult man. So that's another way that they can get through. Like, oh, if this like sweet lady is talking to me about how I'm gonna come nanny for her, and then they end up selling her. Immigrants are also super at risk in America, and I'm assuming in other countries, because kind of the same thing. They don't have like as much of an established, like all of their family might not be here, or they're looking for work, or they're just like figuring out what they want to end up doing in America. So they're just not knowing. So
right. And I'm sure the language barrier too probably contributes to that.
Yeah, like if someone actually like speaks their language and says they have a job, like it seems like a perfect opportunity.
Right, definitely. So typically in this crime, do victims of trafficking self-identify as victims? Are they like seeking help? How is like the psyche?
So I think not normally self-identifying, because they are beaten down and threatened by their traffickers so much into submission. At Free for Life, we do like hospital training, because if a victim has been like beaten down enough, the trafficker like has like faith in them, and something bad happens to them where they can't work, like a physical injury, the trafficker will allow them to go to the hospital. So they'll be in the hospital room by themselves and they won't say anything. They won't get help because they're so terrified, or they think there's nothing else that I can do. These people won't believe me. I'll get in trouble. My trafficker will know that I said something. So that's why we've been doing like classes of like the signs to look for, instead of just like asking, because a lot of times they're not going to want to say something. Like, people don't always want to testify. Like, I don't think people understand how scary it is to ask for help or to get help unless they're in that situation. Like, it's not just as easy as people like make it out to be. After years, like I was saying, there's no hope left. It can also take a few times for them to get the courage up to actually ask for help. So if they do get out, the trafficker can find them, or they have nowhere else to go. I followed this one girl on Instagram, and she was trafficked, and she took like years after she got out to even tell anyone that she was trafficked. So now she does identify as like a survivor of it. But I think in trafficking, there's far less people that come out and say, like, I was trafficked, because it does take so long for them to be able to like get the help they need and feel comfortable talking about it.
So we talk about consent a lot, because when a sexual assault occurs, it is because lack of consent was given. And I know there's oftentimes you do see people consenting, but it's not true consent, because they're consenting because they're afraid, they're consenting for reasons, basically they feel like they can't say no. So would you say, even if a trafficker were in like a position of where they're being sold and consented, would that be true consent?
No, I think even like you were saying, if they get to the point where they aren't saying no, or they're not fighting back anymore, they're not consenting. The consent was beaten or like, terrified out of them. Even I think it annoys me when people say that like prostitutes are consenting, because I think like pimping is a form of sexual assault or of sexual trafficking. The pimp is gaining money from the work that the prostitute is doing. That exchange is trafficking. So I actually had a debate with this guy about this the other day, that prostitutes do it because they want to, like, it's easy money, like, drove me nuts. I don't think that prostitutes, even if they get into that life willingly, are consenting, because the circumstances that put them into that situation are not the circumstances that they wanted. A lot of times they want money. They literally have nowhere, like nothing else to do. They see like a friend that's in it will like coerce them into it. Like, oh, I have a pimp that treats me really good. There's like a fine line. I don't really know if I think all prostitutes are involved in sex trafficking, but I definitely think if they have a pimp, that's a form of sex trafficking. And I don't think that even prostitutes consent, even when they are like asking or. So literally anyone can be a human trafficker. That's what's so scary about it. It's not like some scary like dude in an alley. There was actually an attorney in Florida. He looks just like a regular like dad. He was busted for housing a ring inside of his house. And that was like last week, I think. An attorney. So he's obviously really smart, obviously well off. Like he's like some normal dude. In Brentwood in Tennessee, there's a lot of like suburban homes. So on the outside, it just looks like there's like a sweet family living there, but they have girls locked up. It can literally be anyone. There's not like a mold for who is a trafficker other than just a sick person that wants to profit off of the abuse of others. So it's really scary that you can't really tell who the culprit of human trafficking is ever going to be.
And I think that like that is so true, because I come from a very small town in South Georgia, and there was a lot of human trafficking. And I actually, one of the, I guess you would call them the ringleaders, was actually in high school, came from a very decent family. I would have never, when I read it in the paper, I almost didn't believe it, because I was like, surely that's the wrong person they've got for that. Like, that must be another guy named the same thing. And then I found out it was truly him, and I was very shocked, because it was definitely somebody that would have been off your radar. It would not have been someone you suspected at all. So that really opened up my eyes to, you just, you know, they can look one way and be doing something completely behind closed doors.
Yeah. And then being so normal is also why it's so hard to catch them, because they're obviously smart and they're living their like life over here, so they would never look like a suspect, and all the stuff they're doing is like underground, working with other people, obviously a different name, stuff like that. So it's so difficult to catch anyone doing it.
And the
Right.
girls and the boys that are like caught in it, they don't know any different if they get involved in it in so young age. When you were talking about like the pimp and how they're like, oh, they treat me so good, they don't know any different. So that makes it really hard too, because if you've never been treated a certain way, then you wouldn't know. You would think that that's very normal. And that's why it's so important to educate, you know, how you're supposed to be treated, and what respect looks like. And so
Yeah.
Yeah. I think just like going back to this, because this is something that really bothers me, like the myth that there is a certain type of person who sexually assaults, or a certain type of person who would be a human trafficker. And if someone who gets accused does not fit that mold in our heads, it's automatically used as like evidence or defense that, oh, well, this is such a nice person, they would never do that, or blah, blah, blah. I think that's something that is so common, but like you said, you never know. Like, you don't know what happens behind these people's closed doors, what happens if they were given an opportunity to act on this. So I don't think you can say that anyone could or could not be a perpetrator, because that's just, you just can't say that by knowing their personality or knowing them.
So Annabelle, obviously human trafficking is on the streets, but now that the world is so, especially with COVID-19, everything is online. So with that being said, do you think that human trafficking is also like online as well? Like it's starting to kind of go into just online, or is it kind of both? I mean, what do you think about that? What's your idea about that?
I think 1,000% it is online. There was a Netflix documentary, and I was trying to find the name for it, and I don't remember, but it went in depth about like all the stuff online, and that was a couple of years ago. And now with like technology and everyone being stuck at home, it's definitely online. There's Instagram accounts, Facebook, online forums that you kind of have to know how to get to. You can't just type in like buying like children. Like you have to like know people how to get on there. There's a lot of code words that traffickers will use. So if they have like an Instagram account, they'll post like a picture of a girl that's like 15, but they'll say like 19-year-old offering erotic photos. So it doesn't seem as bad, I guess. So once you get into that, you realize, oh, she's 13, and this is how much you have to pay to have sex with her. We've had at Free for Life, like victims as young as like 2. Like it's sick, but like babies in the younger ages are becoming more like popular and are making more money for the traffickers. So they can have that stuff like their code words saying like we have a baby, but it's not going to say like we have a baby for sale. So that's also why it's hard, because the lingo is always changing. So like the police or like investigators, whoever's getting involved, they have to constantly keep up with like the lingo. Like what is a baby? What is like a 15-year-old girl? Backpage, I don't know, is it still Craigslist or Backpage?
I think when I looked some stuff up about it, it was called Backpage. There was a lot of information about Backpage.
So I know Craigslist used to have under like community service or something like that, they would have ads for girls and guys. But now on Backpage, there's a ton of stuff, again, with the code stuff. Because traffickers are really good at their job, and somehow they're able to all communicate and get the new lingo out. And it's also probably, I think it's safer for them to do it online instead of like bringing people in, because if like they get suspicious that like, oh, this could be an investigator, they just like cut off the online communication.
Right.
The girls that are underage in the bars in Thailand, the mom son will have a phone with photos of the underage girls, and they will meet the girls somewhere else because it's safer for them to not have the underage girls on their property. So it's definitely moving online. Even over there, there's just always going to be something new.
So I have a question. Have you heard about the Wayfair thing? And is that real?
When that came out, it blew my mind, and I did research into it.
Okay.
So I saw that there was even like a code on like the cabinet or whatever you're buying. You would put it into this other, like, not Google, but like a search form, and it would bring like more information about the person that you'd be buying. I didn't see a lot of information that I fully believed that Wayfair was doing as much as everyone was saying, but I do think that that very well could happen on Wayfair and does
Mhm.
happen on other sites, like selling like a cabinet as a child or whatever. So I thought that was good that it came out because people got like fired up and were like actually looking into human trafficking and stuff like that. But I don't think that it was as like there weren't as many of the people. Like one girl I saw, she posted and was like, I'm fine, like I was found. I think the beginning stuff was more true and then people just kind of took it and ran with it, like on social media and stuff. But I do definitely think that it's happening on websites. It could be on Wayfair. I haven't found enough proof to actually be able to say that.
Right.
But in my opinion, I do think that it's happening on websites like that. Because you would never think like cabinets named like Annabelle, like people name, like IKEA has names of stuff.
Right.
Like a really smart way that a normal minded person wouldn't think of.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
probably,
think
I don't know.
Well, I think that's why it's so important too, is just to teach, you know, and educate about your surroundings. Because you never know when you're being watched. Just like you can be watched out in the streets, you can also be watched online. So it's just important to know who you're talking to and who you're around and who your surroundings are. Just like whenever we were, giving out things for different hotels and stuff, I could have been watched and not even known it. It's just very scary to think that you're being watched, but that's why it's just so important to know who you're talking to. And that's why I think it's important for parents as well to know about social media and different things with social media and what your kids are doing, who they're talking to. Just as simple as like them playing Xbox and them playing on a game and talking to someone and they're playing a video game and they're talking about, oh, yeah. And you're like, doing whatever on Xbox, talking about a game, and then it's like, oh man, where do you live? Oh, where do you do? Like they're just sitting there getting information from you, and small young boys and girls don't even know what someone's doing because they think in their mind they're playing with a 15-year-old when they may be playing with a 48-year-old man that's looking out trying to get all their information.
Media and like Xbox and stuff like that is a perfect like a hunting ground for traffickers or perpetrators to groom. Like you were saying, they'll just be like, oh, like where do you live? Like I live near there, like we should hang out or something. It's just parents do need to be very careful and be on top of who their kids are talking to. And even like on dating sites and stuff, like when you're older, like you have to be careful
Definitely.
of those too, because you think you're just gonna go like meet up at this guy's house, but it could not even be that person.
Yeah. You can really never be too safe, sadly. So thank you so much for joining us, Annabelle. We like to end the podcast with asking individuals to share what message they would like survivors to know, what they would want to say to survivors. But really quick, before we have you do that, is there anything else you feel like you need to add, you need to say, you didn't get to say about human trafficking that you would want people to know?
If you think you're actually, or if you are interested or like want to learn more about it, I recently set up Google alerts on my like email, and it is even opening my eyes to that there's so much more happening. So that's like a super easy way to like stay up to date on stuff if you are interested in it.
Well, would you mind sharing now your message to survivors?
Yes. So I want you to know that you don't deserve what happened to you. Even if you blame yourself for the situation that you got into, it's not your fault. You will feel broken and worthless, and like there literally is no hope, and there's no reason to even try to get better because of what has happened to you. But there is hope. You do need to seek out resources and people that can help you recover, because you're going to need people around you to help you get through recovering or getting out of a situation like that. It's okay to ask for help. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean anything negative. You're gonna need help, and it's a good thing to ask for help. You need to take back your life and not give your trafficker or your perpetrator a second more of your time or your power. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us this week. This was some really useful information, and I will be putting in the little comment box below links to a couple of the places she talked about, so that you can get more information on human trafficking if you need. And of course, as always, our information, if you ever need to speak out or talk to someone, even after hearing such triggering information. But yeah, thank you again so much, Annabelle. Amanda, do you have anything to say before we sign off?
Yeah, I just want to say that this information is not to scare people. This information is to just let people know. Just be aware of your surroundings. Be aware of what your children are doing, who they're talking to, and just being aware of, that it can happen even in a small town, and it can be people that you would never suspect at all. So just always knowing your surroundings and knowing that there's people out there that can support you and help you. And Faith can give you all of those informations, and you have Annabelle to, with her Google. So we just thank you so much, Annabelle, for coming on and talking to us and informing us.
Yes, I loved it. Anytime.
All right. Well, we will talk to you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.